All right, so get ready. We're going deep today into symbolism and history, exploring a concept called Solomon's chariot,
Ah, Solomon's chariot.
as described by Hincmar of Reims. This was a prominent archbishop
Uh-huh.
back in the 9th century.
And a fascinating concept because we're not talking about a literal chariot here.
Right.
Hincmar was using it as a metaphor, an elaborate metaphor, for the church itself.
So we're going to kind of unpack his allegorical interpretation of this, which is pretty intricate
It is.
and insightful.
Yes.
And one of the things that I found interesting right off the bat
Mm-hmm.
is that he doesn't just use one metaphor for the church.
Yeah.
He uses a whole bunch. He calls it the kingdom of heaven, the bride, a vineyard, a city.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
what do you make of this? Why all the metaphors?
Well, metaphors, were absolutely essential in early Christianity. If you think about it, they were trying to explain complex spiritual concepts to people who might not have had, a formal theological education.
Right.
So metaphors help to make these ideas more tangible, more relatable, more accessible.
It's like painting a picture with words for people to visualize
Exactly.
these really abstract concepts.
And Hincmar was a master at this.
Yeah.
He really knew how to use language to create these vivid images in the minds of his readers.
So then there's a whole Solomon aspect to this chariot. So we're talking about the same Solomon from the Bible,
Yes.
the wise king.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
But Hincmar doesn't just focus on Solomon as a historical figure.
Right.
He's really interested in the meaning of Solomon's names. Peaceful, beloved of the Lord, and preacher.
Okay, so I'm starting to see where this is going. He's connecting these names to the church somehow.
Precisely. He links them to the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And this was absolutely fundamental to Christian theology in the 9th century, understanding the Trinity.
Right.
So Hincmar cleverly saw Solomon as this kind of threefold figure
Okay.
mirroring the three persons of the Trinity.
So, like, the church is built on this foundation of peace,
Yes.
divine love, and
Yeah.
preaching, all embodied in the figure of Solomon.
Exactly. And it's worth noting, that Hincmar was writing this for a specific audience, King Charles.
Right.
Remember, in the 9th century, the church and the monarchy, they were very closely intertwined.
Oh, for sure.
So he was essentially giving Charles a guide on how to rule, not just as a king, but as a spiritual leader.
So, like, Theology for Rulers 101,
That's a great way to put it.
with Solomon's chariot as the teaching tool.
Exactly. He wanted Charles to really understand the profound spiritual implications
Yeah.
of his role as king.
So this is even more interesting because we're not just talking about abstract theological ideas.
Right.
We're looking at how those ideas played out in the real world
Absolutely.
of politics and power.
Yeah, and that connection between the spiritual and the political,
Yeah,
that's something that still resonates even today, wouldn't you say?
totally. We may not have kings in the same way today, but we still grapple with that relationship between faith and leadership.
Exactly. And that's why Hincmar's work is so relevant. It speaks to these timeless questions that we're still wrestling with.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so we've got Solomon as representing the Trinity,
Yes.
and this chariot we know is a metaphor for the church.
Uh-huh.
But he gets even more specific. He talks about how this chariot was built from the woods of Lebanon. So what's the significance of that?
Well, Lebanon was famous for its majestic cedar trees. These trees were known for their strength, for their resilience.
Right.
And Hincmar's drawing a parallel between those cedars and the members of the church.
I see.
He's saying the church is made up of people who stand tall, who endure, who weather the storms of life.
When I first read about these cedars, I immediately thought of, like, the resilience of early Christian communities
Yes.
facing persecution.
Yeah.
They had to be strong
Yeah.
to survive, just like those cedars weathering the elements. It's a powerful image.
It is. It is. And it speaks to that enduring nature of the church. Hincmar's emphasizing that this institution, that the church, is built to last. That it's founded on something solid, something unshakable.
So we've got this image of the church as this strong, resilient structure built from these mighty cedar trees. But a chariot needs more than just wood, right?
Right.
It needs something to hold it up. And Hincmar mentions these two pillars holding up the chariot. So what do they represent?
Well, he actually offers two interpretations of these pillars, and the first interpretation sees them as representing the faithful, before and after Christ's coming,
Okay.
united by their faith in God.
That's interesting because it shows a continuity across time.
Yes.
It's like he's saying that the church is built on the legacy of those who came before,
That's right.
and that it's our responsibility to carry that legacy forward.
Exactly. And his second interpretation of the pillars, he focuses on those with right faith
Okay.
and good works in the present and future church.
Yeah.
And this idea of right faith and good works, was central to early Christian beliefs about salvation.
Right.
What you do in this life has a direct impact
Yeah.
on your place in the afterlife.
Okay, so these pillars aren't just about physical support.
Right.
They're about spiritual support as well.
Exactly.
They represent the values and beliefs that uphold the church.
Yes, yes. And it shows how Hincmar, wove together these different layers of meaning in his metaphor.
Yeah.
He wasn't just describing a chariot, he was describing a whole worldview.
Yeah, it's amazing how much he packs into this one image.
Yeah.
But I couldn't help but notice, as we're delving deeper into this chariot, that his text is absolutely packed with numbers.
Oh, yeah.
33 chapters, 30 years,
Yeah,
10 commandments.
that's right.
Is this just a coincidence, or is there something more going on here?
Well, this is where we get into the world of numerology,
Okay.
which is the idea that numbers have symbolic significance. And numerology was a big deal in early Christianity.
Oh, I bet.
And Hincmar clearly knew how to use it to his advantage.
So these numbers weren't just random.
No.
He was intentionally using them to convey a deeper meaning.
Absolutely. Early Christians inherited a rich tradition of numerology
Oh.
from both biblical and Jewish thought. For example, the number 30. This was significant because Christ was baptized at the age of 30.
Okay, tell me more about how Hincmar uses that number.
So he connects it to this idea of overcoming different vices at various stages of life. He argues that our early years, are dominated by recklessness, our teenage years by lust, later years by the desire for possessions, and by reaching the age of 30, Christ had triumphed over all those temptations.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's almost like a blueprint for spiritual development, with each stage of life presenting its own unique challenges.
Exactly. And it shows how Hincmar was really trying to make these abstract theological ideas relevant
Yeah.
to people's everyday lives. He wanted them to see how these concepts could actually help them
Right.
navigate the challenges of being human.
So it's like we all have a chariot to build, a spiritual journey to undertake.
That's a great way to put it. And that journey is filled with symbolism, just like Hincmar's chariot.
Okay, so we've got the wood, we've got the pillars,
Yeah.
we've got all these numbers.
Right.
But then he brings in the human body. He says that the church rests on God's left hand
Yes.
and is embraced by his right hand.
Yeah.
So what's he getting at with this imagery?
Well, he's creating this powerful sense of security
Mhm.
and protection. The left hand represents the present life,
Okay.
while the right hand represents future glory. So it's like saying that the church is safe
Yeah.
in God's hands,
Yeah.
both now and in the eternity to come.
It's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
And it speaks to that core Christian belief in God's constant presence
And
and guidance.
exactly. He was reminding King Charles,
Right.
and by extension, all Christians, that they weren't alone in this journey. They had divine support every step of the way.
Yeah, it's amazing how such a simple image can evoke such profound emotions and ideas.
It is.
Okay, so far we've got the woods, the pillars, the numbers, God's hands.
Yeah. What else does he use to build this chariot?
Right. So he describes this chariot's ascent as being purple.
Uh-huh.
And here's where it gets really interesting. He connects that purple color to the dye that was made from sea snails.
Yeah.
Sea snails, that's incredibly specific. Why would he choose that?
Because he's tying it back to the blood of Christ.
Oh.
In Christianity, blood sacrifice, right, is this powerful symbol of atonement for sin.
Yeah?
So he uses that striking purple dye to represent Christ's blood and its power to cleanse us from sin.
So it's like he's saying that the church's ascent towards heaven is made possible by Christ's sacrifice.
Exactly. And remember, this wasn't just some abstract theological concept for early Christians.
Yeah.
This idea of Christ's sacrifice was deeply personal and meaningful. It offered them hope, forgiveness, and a pathway to salvation.
So this chariot, it's rising up towards heaven, bathed in the purple of Christ's blood.
Right.
Where does it finally end up?
Well, Hincmar describes this golden bed in the chariot, and this represents eternal rest with God, a place of peace, of fulfillment, and the ultimate reward for the faithful.
Eternal rest on a golden bed.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
It speaks to that deep human longing for peace and connection with something greater than ourselves.
It does. And for early Christians, this idea of heavenly rest wasn't just some distant hope.
All right.
It was a source of comfort. and strength.
Yeah.
In the face of persecution, in the face of hardship, it gave them something to strive for, something to hold on to in the midst of their struggles.
It's fascinating how he uses this chariot to represent not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one as well. We've gone from the foundations of faith to the ultimate destination of eternal rest,
Right.
all within this one metaphor. It really highlights how much he was able to weave together.
He was a gifted writer
He was.
and thinker.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to unpack and go through
All of
these layers.
And I think there's more.
There's more. Yeah. So we'll be right back after a short break.
And you know, that yearning for rest and connection you mentioned,
Yeah.
that was especially potent in the 9th century. I mean, the world was a very different place back then. Life was often uncertain,
Oh, yeah.
difficult,
You're sure.
even dangerous. So that golden bed wasn't just some abstract theological idea.
Right.
It held real meaning,
Yeah.
real comfort
For sure.
for people living in that time. And Hincmar, he skillfully reinforces that sense of security
Yeah.
by reminding us of the church resting in God's hands. And actually, he takes that imagery a step further.
Okay.
He describes the church being transferred from God's left hand to his right.
That's an interesting detail. I'm curious about that transfer from
Yeah.
the left hand to the right.
Yeah.
What's the shift that he's highlighting here?
It's a symbolic movement
Right.
from this temporal world,
Okay.
symbolized by the left hand, to the eternal realm,
Mm-hmm.
symbolized by the right. So it represents that transition from earthly life to heavenly glory.
So like graduate to a higher level of existence,
Exactly.
a progression toward ultimate fulfillment.
That's it. And Hincmar emphasizes that this graduation, it isn't just about location.
Right.
It's marked by a profound transformation. He uses a rather intriguing phrase, the glory of clarified humanity.
Clarified humanity.
Yes.
What exactly does he mean by that?
No, well, think of it this way. Imagine a piece of raw,
Okay.
uncut diamond. It holds potential, but it needs to be cut and
Wow, that's-
polished to reveal its true brilliance. And that's similar to what Hincmar is suggesting about our human nature. In the afterlife,
Okay.
it's refined, it's perfected, it allows it to fully reflect God's glory.
So we become our best selves,
Yes.
the versions of ourselves that God intended.
Precisely. And that clarified humanity,
Yeah.
it can then fully experience God's presence in a way that's just not possible during
Wow.
our earthly lives.
That's a pretty amazing transformation.
It is. And Hincmar connects this idea to a doubled hundred.
Ah, numerology again. What's the significance of 100?
Well, if you recall, we talked about earlier how he saw 100 as representing perfection.
Right.
And by using doubled hundred, he's signifying a complete transformation
Okay.
in the afterlife,
Wow.
affecting both our souls and our bodies.
So it's not just our spirit being perfected.
That's
Our physical selves, too.
That's right. Early Christians, they strongly believed in the resurrection of the body as a
Right.
central part of salvation. It wasn't enough for just the soul to be saved.
Right.
The body had to be redeemed,
Okay.
glorified as well.
So this makes Solomon's chariot much more than just a vehicle
Yes.
to get to heaven. It becomes a symbol of a complete metamorphosis of our entire being.
Exactly. Hincmar's writing, it goes beyond simply explaining doctrine.
Right.
He's creating this powerful,
Yeah.
evocative vision of what salvation truly entails.
Yeah.
What it means to be human in the fullest sense of the word.
It's interesting how he brings together biblical figures,
Uh-huh.
historical details,
Yeah.
numerology, vivid imagery to create this multi-layered metaphor
Yeah.
for the church.
And we're still not finished.
Yeah, there's more.
Remember, Hincmar was writing all of this for King Charles.
Right.
He wasn't just explaining theology, he was giving Charles a guidebook on leadership.
So how does this chariot metaphor, with all its intricate symbolism, connect to the king's role and responsibilities?
Well, if the church is a chariot,
Yeah.
and the king is supposed to be a defender of the faith, then...
And it becomes his duty to steer that chariot in the right direction.
That's right.
He has to protect and guide the church,
Yes.
promote justice and righteousness,
Yes.
and ultimately lead his people towards that golden bed of eternal rest.
Exactly. Hincmar's highlighting the immense responsibility of leadership,
Yeah.
not just in the political sphere, but also in the spiritual realm. He's showing King Charles that his role goes far beyond simply managing earthly affairs.
Right.
He's tasked with guiding his people towards a higher purpose.
That's a lot of pressure for a king. It makes you wonder how King Charles felt reading all of this.
Yeah, no.
Did he feel inspired or totally overwhelmed?
Perhaps a bit of both. But ultimately, Hincmar's message is a hopeful one.
Right.
It's about the transformative power of faith,
Yeah.
the strength and resilience of the church, and the promise of eternal rest with God.
And those are messages that resonate even today,
They do.
even if we don't live in a world of kings and chariots.
Absolutely. We still grapple with questions of leadership,
Yeah.
faith,
Right.
the meaning of life. And Hincmar's work, it offers us this unique and thought-provoking perspective on these timeless themes.
Okay, I have to admit, this whole Solomon's chariot thing,
Yeah,
it's pretty complex.
it is.
Multi-layered. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing more and more depth as we go.
It is, but that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah.
Hincmar wasn't just trying to explain a concept, he was trying to create an experience, a journey of discovery for his reader.
And that's what we're trying to do here, too. To take you, the listener, on a journey into the heart of this ancient text.
That's right.
And explore its relevance for today. So we're back, and I am still trying to wrap my head around all this symbolism.
Yeah.
Packed into Solomon's chariot.
Oh, it's a lot to take in.
It is.
That's for sure. It's amazing how Hincmar was able to weave together so many different threads of meaning. And, you know, one detail that really stands out to me is his discussion of the 46 years it took to build Solomon's temple.
Oh, you're talking about that passage where he mentions how the Jews questioned Jesus about rebuilding the temple in 3 days when it originally took 46 years. And I remember thinking, why is that specific number so important?
Yeah, and it's a great question.
Yeah.
And it shows just how carefully Hincmar crafted this text.
Right.
He doesn't just throw, random numbers around those 46 years. They actually represent the time it took to form the body of Christ in the womb of the Virgin Mary.
I'm struck by how he connects the construction of a physical temple with the formation of Christ's body.
Yes.
Which then becomes this metaphor for the church itself. It's almost like he's drawing this parallel between these acts of creation.
That's exactly what he's doing. And for early Christians, the incarnation, the idea that God became human in the person of Jesus, that was absolutely central to their faith.
Yeah.
So Hincmar is making the incarnation more tangible, more relatable, by connecting it to something as concrete as the construction of a building.
It's like he's grounding this really profound theological concept in a physical reality that people could understand and connect with.
Exactly. He's bridging that gap between the spiritual and the physical, the divine and the human.
And it's not just about the incarnation itself.
Right.
He goes even deeper, using numerology to break down those 46 years.
That's right.
And show how they align with these different stages of human development in the womb.
Right. So he's highlighting this interconnectedness of the spiritual and physical even further. Just as a human being develops in stages within the womb, so too does the church, the body of Christ, grow and mature over time.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
And it reinforces this idea that the church is a living, breathing entity.
Yes.
It's not static or unchanging.
Right.
It's constantly evolving, growing, being shaped by the forces of history and the actions of its members.
Exactly. And remember, Hincmar was writing this for a king. Someone who had the power to shape the course of history and influence the development of the church.
Yeah, so he was subtly reminding King Charles that he had this responsibility to nurture the church, to guide it towards its ultimate destination.
Precisely. Just as a skilled charioteer would carefully guide his chariot along the road.
Right.
So too must a king, or any leader for that matter, guide the church with wisdom, compassion, and a deep understanding of its spiritual purpose.
And that makes me think about how Hincmar's insights might apply to us today.
Yeah.
We may not have kings in the same way.
Right.
But we all have a role to play in shaping the future of the church.
Absolutely. We are all, in a sense, charioteers.
Yeah.
We each have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of the church, to help steer it towards a better future. And that future, as Hincmar so beautifully describes it, is one of clarified humanity and eternal rest with God.
It's a vision of hope.
Yes.
Transformation. Of ultimate fulfillment. And it's a vision that continues to inspire and challenge us.
It does.
Even centuries after Hincmar penned his words.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
And I'm honestly blown away by the depth and complexity of Hincmar's thinking.
He was a brilliant guy.
He was.
No doubt about it.
It's clear that Solomon's chariot is much more than just a simple metaphor. It's a window into the mind of a brilliant theologian, a guide for rulers, and a timeless reflection on the nature of faith, leadership,
and the human journey.
And what I find so inspiring is that even though it was written over 1,000 years ago,
Right.
it still speaks to us today. It reminds us that the church is this living,
Yeah.
evolving entity,
Right.
and that we all have a part to play in shaping its future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Solomon's Chariot, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. If Solomon's Chariot is this metaphor for the church, how does this impact our understanding of the church's role in the world today? How do we see the church moving, evolving,
Yeah.
perhaps even struggling to stay on course in the modern world? And what role do you play in helping to steer that chariot
Right.
towards a better future?
Those are great questions. And perhaps, like Hincmar, we can find answers by looking deeper into the symbols and the stories that shape our faith,
Yeah,
and by reflecting on those timeless truths that they reveal.
that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey into the world of Solomon's Chariot. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas.